Welcome to Three Devs and a Maybe. Now introducing your show hosts, Michael Budd, Fraser Hart, Lewis Gaines, and Ed Mann.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Three Devs and a Maybe. My name's Ed Mann, and today we're very lucky to be joined yet again by Jay Smith. How you doing, Jay?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very, very good, thank you, sir. And thank you for taking the time to come on the show again.
Yeah. It was fun last time. I enjoyed it. So
awesome. I'm hoping to relive that. Plenty has happened. I think it was last time we spoke was in November time, and since then, plenty has happened in the cryptocurrency space, both financially and also what I care about mostly is technically as well. So I thought it'd be really great to get you back on the show, and we can kind of talk about a host of different topics.
So I was just going to say, it's kind of funny because I think the price now is about the same as it was when we last spoke.
Yeah, so it's almost like nothing's happened. I mean, this is the beauty of crypto, It's just plateaued. Little would you know that it shot up to something like 14,000 and back down again. But so I mean, for you, kind of how has the last couple of months been for you?
It's been crazy. November and December, shortly after speaking to you, was the biggest influx of people I've ever seen into cryptocurrency. Everyone I knew, family members that have never cared about it, friends. It was absolutely insane. People that I've spoken to once in my life were reaching out to me. People that I sent money to years ago were reaching out to me asking where it was, and I'm like, well,
yeah. They're like, you sent me that joke money. That turns out not to be joke money anymore.
Yeah, indeed. It's been pretty crazy. And wow, as we're speaking, cryptocurrencies have just literally mooned. So I've got charts open on one of my screens, and everything's just shot up. So something.
And is there a cause and effect, or is it just? I mean, because that's the thing at the moment. Kind of what really has been going on? I know that we obviously had this massive boom from people coming in, and then it's kind of plateaued now. Do you mind maybe giving a little bit of kind of a history of the last couple of months? That's a very easy thing to do, obviously.
Yeah, I think a lot of the talk about new technology like Lightning Network coming through, which is now running pretty well on the mainnet of Bitcoin in theory. I haven't used it, but I know a lot of people that have. So that was getting a lot of attention. Obviously, CryptoKitties was shortly after we spoke, I think. Which was the most used app in Ethereum.
Would you mind explaining that for the audience, what actual CryptoKitties is?
So CryptoKitties is actually the first real use of an ERC-721 token. So there's two token standards in Ethereum. One is ERC-20, which is what pretty much everything that uses Ethereum is using. It basically lets you create a currency where every single unit of that currency is entirely identical to every other unit. So they're all interchangeable. But ERC-721 is different and lets you do some cool things. So with ERC-721, you can make units that are different to other units in different ways, and you can build all sorts of cool relationships. So effectively, some smart people managed to figure out a way of making it so that you could breed coins, you could breed tokens. So you get a cat, and that cat has traits. So maybe your cat's a very hairy cat, or it's got long legs. And if you get another cat and then you kind of leave them together for a while in your wallet, then you can basically make them breed together and generate a new coin or a new crypto kitty, effectively, which has different traits, and it's adopted traits from the parents. So it was a really cool experiment, and they actually just raised a bunch of funding, something in the region of 50 million, I think.
You're joking.
No, I'm not joking. They just raised an absolute wealth of funding. I assume because people are interested in the potential to build real games out of it.
Yeah, because I think and it's also the proof of concept, isn't it? I mean, the fact that this really did kind of overwhelm the Ethereum network, which is a bit scary.
Yeah, it ground it to a halt. My girlfriend was asking me to buy her some CryptoKitties. I showed her MetaMask, and she quickly changed her mind.
Oh, brilliant, man! Well, that is the thing, isn't it? And I mean, it needs these kind of surges, to kind of to keep the the technology running, and all these new things that are coming out. Vitalik's talking about, and all of the Ethereum developers are talking about. It does show that we still are in very much the infancy, and it's just an exciting time because these technologies are growing in front of us, really.
Yeah, exactly. And it was good because it did a lot of useful testing of the network effectively. We really got to see just how much the Ethereum network could handle as that project took off. I think Vlad and Vitalik and the other guys at Ethereum are now potentially even more urgently trying to implement their solutions to scaling.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of those funny things with the whole cryptocurrency space is that a lot of it is we don't really like, because there's been actually, I don't know whether you've seen it, Software Engineering Daily. They're like a podcast kind of, they do so much work in the software engineering space, but they did this massive series on Ethereum, on pretty much all these different cryptocurrencies and also the technologies behind them. And one of the things that really kind of shone out from it is that really we don't know why it works, because there is no mathematical proofs behind things, such as like proof of work. There is no mathematical formula of why this works. It just works, and you put it into practice and you see it working. And the fact that, over years time, years and years of it working, it kind of is a self-fulfilling prophecy of it. Well, then it's got to work because it has worked. So it's interesting kind of, you need these kind of experiences in the real world of like real use cases to actually kind of validate, yes, we're going in the right direction, and yes, well, this is why we need these technologies and things of that ilk.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you talk about proof of work as an experiment. I mean, in proof of stake, proof of there's one called proof of brain, which is used in Steem. There's proof of importance used in NEM. All of these different systems are the ones that succeeded their experiments effectively. When Satoshi created proof of work, it really was a gamble on if it would actually work, if people would really be motivated to spend money mining something that doesn't have any value, and if the difficulty changes and things like that would really be enforceable and work okay, or if people could game the system. But so far, proof of work has proven very, very resilient against a whole host of different attack vectors. So it I think it's proven itself well. But yeah, it's an interesting field. It's always evolving.
Absolutely. And as I say, it's in its infancy, so it's constantly evolving and switching. And I think, proof of work, when people, say like proof of work isn't the most optimal way of doing such a thing, but it's at this time the only proven way to do it. It's had 10 years now of it working, essentially. So it's the only one that's actually stood the test of time. Obviously, proof of work, the one thing about it is it pretty much does want to destroy the whole environment, with the fact that your stake in it and you're putting some skin in the game is the fact that with electricity. And I can't remember, there was like some stat or kind of thing of like how much Bitcoin, like the Bitcoin network, the amount of electricity actually uses constitutes to many countries worth of electricity, which is kind of scary, because it obviously can't stay that way, and that's why we're looking at these different proof kind of protocols. But yeah, it is very interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we're starting to see a transition away from proof of stake now for a lot of cryptocurrencies, as from proof of stake, proof of work. Sorry,
they're all proof of, aren't they?
Yeah, they're all proofs of. We could just say the last word and ignore the first two. I think we're starting to see a slight transition away from it in this era of ASICs and things like that, like what happened with Bitcoin Cash, for example, and Bitmain and the exploit that they found, and Bitfury building things into their cards that allows them to gain some of the profits and things. Like there have been some problems with proof of work, and the main problem has been stopping people from building ASICs and stopping people.
That is pretty much it, isn't it? That is the ground thing.
Yeah, that's one of the core problems. Another core problem, of course, is the 51% attack. We see in most cryptocurrencies, you can pretty much gain 51% of the network with just 3 or 4 mining pools, because, of course, it's inefficient to mine alone.
That's it, and obviously you're going to, these clusters are going to end up generating, and this is putting it into the real world, where people are going to, share resources, whether they're going to buy out that themselves, or as you say, they're going to go together and make these mining pools that essentially, become problems. I mean, it's happened in the past, hasn't it, where some pools actually had to disband because of this.
Yeah, I remember. I think it was BTC. Getting over 51% back in about 2014 in just one mining pool. And so everyone was moving over to Slush Pool and a few other pools.
Would you mind maybe for the audience just to explain kind of what the 50% attack is? I know we touched on it a bit last episode, but it'd be good maybe to rehash it.
Yeah, so basically the 51% attack means that you are controlling 51% of hashing power. And if you control 51% of hashing power, then that means that you are going to be creating, on average, more blocks than the remaining 49%. Now, since Bitcoin and most cryptocurrencies work on a longest chain basis, that enables them to effectively have control of the network and insert some malicious transactions if they want to. So, for example, they could undo some transactions and send transactions back to people and validate transactions that should not be validated effectively. So they would be able to do things like roll back the blockchain and stuff. Yeah, that's a big problem. Immutability is one of the core things about Bitcoin. So yeah, I would say that's basically the 51% attack rounded up, I guess.
No, absolutely. And that is a big problem with the proof of work. And like you say, there's been past, problems with it shining a light. And I suppose it's the 51% attack and then obviously the environmental costs. These are the two big factors why proof of work really can't be sustained. We need to look at a different way of dealing with it and doing a proof protocol.
Yeah, so with the environmental stuff, it's quite interesting actually. I have a lot of debates about people who say, how can you trade this thing when it's doing so much damage to the planet? And I'm a self-confessed greenie, so a pretty left-leaning guy. So I do care a lot about the planet and how we're affecting it. But as I keep pointing out to people, actually, it's so far worked as a bit of a storage method, effectively, of capturing excess energy that we are producing. So in China, for example, a lot of the mining farms are actually connected directly to hydro plants, which is where they get their power from. And so they are using excess power generated to generate these things. I did some consultancy in London for someone that I obviously won't name, who owns a bunch of power stations around the world, some of which are in China. These are coal stations in this instance. And they were looking at methods for quickly ramping up and ramping down in mining to use excess power as a way of because obviously trying to slow down the production of the energy takes a lot longer and actually almost costs more power than it would save in a lot of instances. So it's better to just use that power and effectively store it in something. So in the same way that you can store power in batteries, which is what Tesla is doing with their solar panels and things, there are now power plants that are working directly with cryptocurrencies to try and store it in value within a cryptocurrency effectively. So I'm not trying to excuse it. Obviously, I still think it is an inefficient system because we're using, somewhere around the region of what the country of Hungary is using. And I've been to Hungary. It's a nice place. and they have a lot of electricity. So So it's not a small amount of power at all. But it is interesting. Genesis Mining, for example, they're operating out of Iceland and using geothermal power, and of course they don't really have to pay for much cooling up there. They just put a few fans in. So I think mining has a tendency to move towards the best environments for it, and the best environments are cold environments where there is excess energy, basically.
Yeah, that really does check the list off, doesn't it, of a good place to actually put a mining rig.
Yep.
So proof of work, we've kind of come to the conclusion that we need probably something else. And there are, as you say, a couple of different proof kind of protocols that have been proposed, one of which Ethereum are taking on. And I think this is one of the interesting things because Bitcoin primarily is a very kind of reluctant, I would say now, it's obviously, it invented the space. So, it started this movement off and it's got 10 years now of and the developers, are very hesitant, obviously, to do any switching and things. We've got SegWit and now we've got the Lightning Network. Would it be very good, maybe to discuss, would you mind maybe discussing kind of what the Lightning Network is and why is it so important to the Bitcoin network?
Yeah, so the Lightning Network is basically taking day-to-day transactions off of the main Bitcoin blockchain. That's like the goal of it, right? And to achieve this in a way that is, fair and cheap and fast and manageable and secure, what they have done basically is created a smart contract, a type of smart contract. And actually, Ethereum has done this as well. They're working on effectively the same technology in Raiden, and Plasma is quite similar to this as well, but takes it a step further. So basically, the smart contract is a multi-sig wallet. So you have two people, me and you, and we can choose together to open a wallet. And both of us have the right to a wallet, a payment channel. And both of us have the right to close this channel at any point that we want. All we have to do is use the last version of something that we both signed. So in the instance of we open it, that transaction is written onto the blockchain, the real blockchain. And then we can close it again, either one of us without the other person's permission, and settle the balance of that payment channel just by showing proof of the last thing that we both signed. So that's effectively how the payment channel works. So once the payment channel is set up, I can send you as many transactions and you back to me as we want. And all of these transactions are effectively stored off-chain. They're stored in our Lightning-compatible wallets, effectively. So we both keep a copy of our balance that we owe each other in this payment channel. And then whenever we close it, the balance is settled onto the real blockchain and the funds actually transfer. So when we open the contract, we have to deposit the amount of money that we think we might need for that payment channel. We can't exceed that amount at any point, if that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense, man. Absolutely. And this is super interesting. And, obviously it's a controversial debate because, some people say, that there should be one true chain, obviously, and, splitting it off into its own world. You're making essentially another distributing out, obviously, the trust, and you're making these kind of, that now it becomes you trusting these Lightning networks and these Lightning servers. How are the servers actually how do they connect to each other and communicate?
So they use the Bitcoin Mainnet to speak to each other effectively, but really it's not a real problem in terms of decentralization. Actually, it's still pretty decentralized. So what you can do is you can create a mesh net of these payment channels. So if, for example, I have a payment channel open to, let's say, Coinbase, and you also have a payment channel open to Coinbase, I can send you money by using those two payment channels without Coinbase knowing what I'm sending to you. So you can do multi-hop transactions in this network, and there's really no infrastructure cost. The only major cost to it is effectively the wallets that we'll have to use, which again, you don't have to keep them open 24 hours or anything like that. It's all stored locally, effectively. It's locally for me and locally for you. And then Coinbase, in that instance, they see it going through them, but they don't know what it is. It's fully encrypted. It goes to you, and then once it reaches you, I get effectively validation that you've got it, and I send you the password to unlock that hash. So it's super, super, super smart systems. And I remember the first time I saw this explained for Lightning Network, and I've probably done a terrible job of explaining this, by the way. The first time I saw it was just absolutely mind-blowing to me, to think that we could effectively, through very few connections, very few hops, because of course there's the famous phrase about you're connected to everyone through like 7 hops, right? Through 7 friends, you know everyone in the world. So if that turns out to be true, which I guess we'll find out with Lightning Network, then it means that in 7 hops, we could make a payment to anyone using Lightning Network, and we would only need a maximum of, 7 payment channels each per person, which is pretty accessible.
And it's just amazing how they kind of are able to engineer this on top of an existing system. Because I think that's, obviously we don't want to change the fundamentals. We just want to add on top. And this is kind of it, using external systems.
Yeah, exactly. So the wallets actually have a time limit on them, the payment channels. And so they automatically will want to close after a set time that you can choose when you create it. And yeah, it settles to the blockchain. So every once in a while it will close the payment channel and settle it on the blockchain. You can see the money's gone somewhere. But what's interesting is that if I did use the Coinbase channel to get to you and stuff, for example, there really would be no record of me paying you, because all people would see is my payment channel to Coinbase and Coinbase's payment channel to you. And they don't know that I've gone through that. So it actually adds a layer of privacy to the network as well, which is really quite interesting, because Bitcoin has not really had that for quite a long time. not since people realized they could just go back through history and see everything.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, so what, once it gets written to the master blockchain, that's all done with proof of work again. One thing that Ethereum want to do, and I think this is one of the best things about Ethereum, is that they still are trying to push. They are a lot more kind of adept to wanting to change. And with their Casper protocol, using Casper, they want to move from a proof of work to a proof of stake. Now, this is where it gets a little bit, I think proof of work, you can kind of understand. And, obviously it's been tried and true for many years. What does proof of stake do? And like, what are the pros and cons of that change?
Okay, so proof of stake is basically where you lock up a bunch of funds in your wallet, and that is your bet that you will continue to validate the network in a safe way. And if you don't validate the network in a safe way, that money gets taken away. So effectively, you have a node that's running 24/7, which is good because it's adding more nodes to the network, and Bitcoin does struggle with the number of nodes. So that's one pro of it. Another pro is, of course, that it's 51% attack resistant, because it's way more accessible to people. For example, I stake using a cryptocurrency called PIVX, and the minimum PIVX that you need to stake with is 1 PIV. And 1 PIV currently is worth, I think, somewhere around about $6. So for $6, you can actually genuinely earn rewards consistently without joining a mining pool or a staking pool. I say that in Ethereum, you may have to join staking pools at the start, but we'll move on to that in a minute. Sorry. So yeah, proof of stake is effectively you put your money on the line to say that you're going to validate things.
You're going to put your money where your mouth is about
Exactly.
being honest.
And if you do something wrong, then the network will come back and punish you. It's as simple as that. And there's a few variations on it where, for example, there's things to do with how long the coins have been staking for, how long your wallet's been around, all of this sort of stuff to try and make it a bit more fair. Because one of the big cons of proof of stake, of course, is that the rich get richer. If you're staking with 20% of the network and you're earning 1% every year, for example, then you're earning a lot more than someone who's staking with 1% of the network and getting 1% a year.
You just become monopolies in different ways, as opposed to having mining rigs set up that, obviously are kind of honing that power. It's actually with real money or real coin. Exactly.
So with Ethereum's implementation via Casper, currently on the testnet, I think it's 1,500 ETH that you have to stake as a minimum. So that's a lot of money. That's like $400,000-$500,000 at today's prices. So, and that's after the big correction we've had. So, that's some substantial money. But Vitalik does want to slowly bring that down. That's part of an effort to kind of taper proof of stake in and proof of work out via Casper.
Yeah, because they're hoping to do like a split, aren't they? Where it's going to be proof of work and proof of stake at the beginning. So it's not going to be an initial, switch.
Yeah, and it's due to take somewhere around 2 to 3 years for that transition to effectively complete. So it will start with a really high limit on who can stake to not incentivize too many people to do it. And only 1 in every 100th block, I think it is, will be effectively minted using proof of stake, whereas 99 of those 100 will be generated using proof of work. And then over time, the limit for staking will come down, and the number of blocks that staking can mint will increase, while the number of proof of work goes down.
Man, it's such an interesting, because this is now a real life system that you're now having to kind of work on, and it is that whole design decisions of how do we get. It's the hardest system. It's not something like a web application where you can just tear up and tear down these systems yourself. They're privately managed. This is other people's. You have to incentivize them enough to want to switch, and there's that slow rollout of how we're going to get there without any problems in between.
And it's interesting because I've always thought that launching a currency from scratch with proof of stake is quite a difficult thing to do, because you don't have that reinforcing factor of, hey, we have to spend this much for hardware, so the price should be this much, otherwise we stop mining, at which point the cryptocurrency doesn't really work, right? So you have this like support structure that's supporting the value, whereas you don't really have that in proof of stake, at least not at the start. However, later on, I think proof of stake does it in an even more powerful way. So if we look at something like Dash, for example, which has masternodes which use proof of stake, in Dash you have to stake a minimum of 1,000. I think it's 1,000. It might be 10,000 Dash, which is an awful lot of money. I think it's up in the millions now. And when you're doing this, of course, that money is locked up. So if you think about it, it's an incentive for the price. It's not an incentive. It's a mechanism to increase price growth actually in that cryptocurrency, because the money is locked up. People aren't going to spend that money. They're not going to sell it and withdraw because they don't want to lose the chance of having their masternode and their staking rewards. So you have this pressure that's pushing the price upwards because all of this supply is just being taken offline and locked down because people want to get their 2 or 3% yearly revenue from it.
Are they able to get the 2-3%? Does that go to another wallet, or is that actually locked up in the initial?
It goes into their wallet. They can use that as they wish, as long as they stay above the minimum level. So perhaps they would, constantly be spending that new generated cryptocurrency, but there's still 1,000 or 10,000 Dash locked up that they will not want to move because they don't want to risk losing their access to their node if the price spikes when they're gone.
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned obviously proof of stake currently, and there are some coins out there. So you mentioned one of them. Like, how has your experience been with these coins?
Actually, my experience with PIVX was quite bad. Actually, it's one of my favorite coins, but it is like Ethereum. In fact, more than Ethereum, I would say it's probably one of the most insanely fast-moving cryptocurrencies there is. And they've implemented a bunch of features that you don't see in any other cryptocurrency project at the moment. And so staking was quite difficult to get working to begin with. Once it was up and running, I was quite happy, but the sheer number of things they're pushing through on that blockchain alone has caused so many issues, including me losing all of my PIVX, which
You're
is
joking.
Entirely unrecoverable. And I had a substantial amount of PIVX. So
how the hell did that happen? If you don't mind mentioning.
Yeah, I'll go through it. So they introduced something called ZPIV, which is effectively a privacy network built on top of PIVX. So not too dissimilar to something like the Lightning Network, except that it's its own cryptocurrency built on top of that one that's one-to-one exchangeable effectively. And when they implemented this, everyone had to update their wallets, and there were a bunch of bugs, and they had to roll back the blockchain as like a concerted effort about 4 times in order to fix it, and all of that was fine. But a few months later, my PC died, and so I went to my backup and my backup wallet of PIVX, and I went to go and recover the funds, and I started downloading the blockchain, and everything was looking fine. I saw the transactions going in and out, but eventually when it was fully loaded, I realized that my balance was only at 6 PIV or something like that. And I looked into it, and basically it was because when they implemented the upgrade, everyone who had a backup of their wallet had to create a new one every time they minted some ZPIV instead of traditional PIV. So ZPIV is the privacy PIVX, and by default, the wallet was set to effectively convert all of it like the first time, and then after that, it would convert like 10% every time new funds were added to the wallet. So it would keep 10% always in ZPIV to help power that network. And so because it had moved all into that, and it's a privacy-based cryptocurrency, and my wallet didn't support my backup wallet didn't support that privacy-based cryptocurrency, it was gone forever, entirely unrecoverable.
Oh man. So, the risks, the risks of crypto.
The worst thing is that about 3 days after that, BitGrail exchange got hacked, and I lost a load of nano as well.
No.
So, hey, I've been in the crypto space for years.
It's the Wild West, isn't it?
And I've lost funds, 3 or 4 times. It's always been pretty small amounts, but both of those really did hurt a bit.
Especially at these prices. Oh man! Yeah. But so are you still, obviously you've got a bit of a bitter taste in your mouth with PIVX now. I think it's interesting with the cryptocurrency. Like, it's good that you see development. I mean, obviously with all of these, ICOs and things like that, like, people have these false promises, and it's nice to see actually things come to fruition and people working on these projects. But do you feel like maybe it's kind of too much? There's kind of, you need to have that in between, like Ethereum now, where it's a stable coin that needs obviously progression, but over time in a staged manner.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all comes down to risk appetite, really, at the end of the day. If you are a new cryptocurrency starting now and you want to compete just as a currency, then you have to work very, very hard to try and surpass the features that are available in Monero and Zcash and Bitcoin and PIVX and Dash. Like all of those currencies have got some really, really strong features that are pretty complex. And if you want
to build a big user
base, a big user base as well, and the network effect is a real thing. So you have to grow quickly. So I think you're almost forced, if it's a new project, to work at just insane pace. And if you look at the growth of currencies over time, like Ethereum was an awful lot faster moving than Bitcoin, and you've got EOS, which is even faster moving than that, and then you've got Cardano, which is just thinking like 4 years in the future and isn't even trying to compete at the moment effectively. So you have all of these different projects that are trying to grow quickly in the areas that they're competing in, and the later they are starting, the faster they have to move, or the more crazy features they have to try and build.
And they need a twist. They all need a twist. And like you say, it is the whole kind of user base is such an important aspect because it's the most people using it, and that will win out essentially. It doesn't matter if you're the best. It's like Betamax versus VHS.
Yes.
It's like HD to DVD to Blu-ray or whatever these things, whether you feel, which one's the better one, it doesn't actually matter. It's the one that people use.
Yeah. It doesn't have to, you can have the best features in the world, but unless it's substantial enough to make people switch over, they won't switch.
Absolutely, man.
And I think there's evidence of that absolutely everywhere in the world, really, if you look at it, as you just gave plenty of examples of.
No, absolutely. It's really interesting because with proof of stake, I've been kind of interested in the concept of it and, trying to wrap your head around it, of the idea of the incentives behind it and everything. And I'll put it in the show notes, but there's this really interesting video series from, I think it's Alpha Crypto. And essentially he's gone through this experiment from last year. I think he's a fellow Brit, where he actually set up, I think he went through like PIVX, Neo, Red Coin, Exclusive Coin, Black Coin, Neo's Coin, all of these different ones, set them up on like a massive VM suite and just like is leaving them running for the year, just to see kind of what growth you get in, etc. So I think it's interesting to see this kind of thing, and the move away from this kind of central proof of work system where people coming in now, they really are kind of like, they don't have much stake in the game in that regard. Like, what is the incentive for them to store a whole blockchain other than to be nice? It's all about these rewards.
Yeah. And of course, it's about competing with each other as well, because you don't want to, there's like almost conflicting interests at play. So as a currency that wants to compete with Bitcoin, you want to be more deflationary, right? So you want to generate less coins every year, because by doing that, the store value is higher. But at the same time, you want to lure people in by saying, hey, look, you earn this much.
You actually get some coins.
Yeah, exactly. And so you have to generate that from somewhere. And you're either generating it from high transaction fees or you're generating it from interest. So there's this weird playoff between the two, trying to figure out what happened, which model to go with.
Yeah, it's a really hard decision, and it's interesting with proof of stake. Like, what's your thoughts? What do you think the miners are thinking about this? Obviously, they've put a lot of investment into the proof of work. The fact that Ethereum obviously is going to be moving away, could that have a big play in like whether Ethereum is successful with the switch over?
I think Ethereum is pretty safe at this point, and if anything, I expect to see more price growth towards Casper's release. As people get excited about potentially staking on it, and people try and build up their balances to have enough to become a staker. In terms of like the impact on proof of work and on miners specifically who bought hardware and invested in mining, I think there's plenty of other options out there, and there will be for a very long time. Personally, I don't think Bitcoin will ever switch, and I actually think that that's okay, because I think we've seen from the amount of power that's used through the whole crypto space and through Bitcoin on its own that realistically we probably can afford to have one blockchain that is proof of work. And I think it's quite important to have it. I think it's valuable. People see it as a real safe haven because of its proof of work. Monero have also commented that they're very keen to stick with proof of work and continually change their algorithm to be resistant to ASICs.
Yeah, because that obviously that's like that is like the constant run, isn't it? They're chasing the tail with the fact that obviously ASICs come along. I think Ethereum have like been able to kind of deal, because Ethereum is one of those ones where it was very much GPU bound based on the fact of memory, etc. But some ASICs have come out that are kind of competing with that, and it's the decisions whether they want to actually. I think Vitalik said no, he doesn't want to at this time.
Yeah. And the same with Monero and Litecoin's been through the same thing. You know, Litecoin's using script-based mining, which is very memory intensive, and you know, they went a very long time still being mineable on CPUs. So in the era when Bitcoin moved from CPUs to GPUs, Litecoin was still mineable on CPUs. So people were actually mining both at the same time on the same system. Which is quite interesting. And there are other different types out there as well. You know, there's proof of storage, which is proof of how much hard drive space you have, and people were literally buying banks and banks and banks of, you know, server racking to install all of these hard drives to mine cryptocurrency. I don't think that one actually worked out too well.
I was thinking that. I think that there is other, obviously, blockchains, technologies and stuff that rely on, you know, storage. I think, you know, maybe down the line in this podcast we can talk about like IPFS and stuff. You know, there's some interesting, you know, it's not only based on the fact of currency. You know, there is other practical use cases.
Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of cryptocurrencies out at the moment which are effectively for decentralized file storage. And only a couple of weeks ago, actually, Sirecoin, which is my favorite of those cryptocurrencies, released a video of them testing live streaming video that is stored on their decentralized storage system. So you can stream your video that's stored effectively in decentralized Dropbox to your PC without having to download it, which is really, really cool. Really, really cool technology. And it makes you wonder how long until we get fully decentralized streaming applications up and running as well, because there are quite a few projects also working on that.
Man, this space is so cool. I think this is one of those spaces, especially when like the internet started up, and you know, it's something that you have to constantly be kind of, you know, looking at the news, seeing what's going on, reading the GitHub pulls and everything. And that's what I love about it. It's so interesting and so revolutionary.
Yeah, it's growing at an exponential rate. I mean, even proof of stake, which is still, you know, it's one of the older concepts for mining algorithms, and was around, I think, from, you know, around 2012, 2013 kind of time was the first time I remember seeing it. And even that, like, we've now got so many different variations of it. As I mentioned, you can set it up so it's based on coin age, and you can base it on random selection of groups of people to be able to take it in turns. So it's not based on just how much money you have in your wallet. Things like Definity, which is a new project coming up, which uses a form of delegated proof of stake, and EOS uses delegated proof of stake in another different form. Like, the space is just rapidly evolving. And I think I do think we're reaching a state of getting to that point where we will have that moment where we have something that's good enough. It may not be perfect, and there will still be people trying to strive for something more perfect. But I think we're reaching the point where we could hit algorithms and transaction volumes that are good enough for the first generation of applications to finally kind of be released out into the wild.
And it's interesting because this space at this time, you know, people, their brains are going wild over all these different things. You know, like you say, they're going into so many different, like, proof of, you know, space and all this kind of crazy stuff. It feels like, you know, the 1970s when programming, like all of these concepts now we do in programming that we rehash essentially came out in the beautiful, the 70s essentially. And, you know, functional and all OOP and all this. And it's fun to see that, you know, at this time we are really at the forefront of it. And, you know, over time, as you say, things will get rehashed and, you know, we'll slowly move towards a more stable environment where we'll be happy with what we got. But, you know, this is the time at the moment where all of these ideas are kind of first coming out. So you just see wacky stuff, crazy stuff. I mean, CryptoKitties, all these kind of things that are really pushing it. It's absolutely amazing.
I think I'm at the point now where, you know, I remember a couple of years ago. In fact, I remember 4 years ago, and it was so easy to keep up with cryptocurrencies because there were about 12 of them at the time. You know, you had Darkcoin, Peercoin, Namecoin, you know, Litecoin and Bitcoin, a handful of others. I remember NXT was the big one. NXT was the Ethereum. Everyone was hyped about NXT. And NXT still exists, and actually they released a second version of NXT, and it's still, you know, a big cryptocurrency. It's got a big following, but it's just so impossible to keep up with these things now. You know, it moves at such a pace, and sometimes I go back and I look at those old coins like Nova Coin, which used to be, you know, 4th or 5th on Coin Market Cap, is now, you know, down in like 500th or something. And it just shows how far we've come and how ruthless the environment is. You know, you build something good or you become irrelevant quite quickly.
Definitely. Mentioning CryptoKitties again, and the fact that the amount of overload on the Ethereum network that caused, one way of dealing with this is the fact of this idea and concept called sharding. Would you maybe kind of explain a little bit, kind of a high level overview of what that idea is in the Ethereum network and really what the benefits are going to be?
Yeah, so sharding is something that's a bit more complex to explain in detail, but effectively it is side chains. It's side chains and like trees of chains that have the parent chain of Ethereum. So you can have a chain underneath Ethereum that doesn't use proof of stake or proof of work. It just inherits that from the chain above it. It inherits that property. And you can build these chains for much more specific tasks. And then the nodes for that chain are run by the people that are interested in that particular data set effectively. So if people are really interested in having something that's got high computational power or, high storage or whatever, or maybe like super fast transactions, then they can run nodes for these different side chains. And if these chains, are under attack or face problems, you can actually skip it and still go back up to the base chain, which is capable of handling everything, the default Ethereum chain. And this sharding effectively is all like kind of entangled with Plasma in how it works. And if you look at things like the new Telegram ICO for Ton, they talk about effectively turning not just having side chains and parent and child chains, but having every block be a blockchain and all these kind of things. And it very quickly becomes very confusing.
Oh, yes, absolutely, man.
Yeah, it's something that definitely is worth spending. Like, if it's something that interests you, you'll probably need to take, maybe a week of searching around Wikipedia, YouTube, and various forums to really wrap your head around exactly how it works. And honestly, I still struggle with sharding and side chains. It's definitely a difficult concept to get your head around.
It is all about throughput, isn't it? And the fact of, I think Ethereum have got one of the hardest jobs going is that they essentially want to be able to run any dApp, but people don't care about all dApps. And this is the trouble with it, is that you want to maintain this throughput, but if CryptoKitties is suddenly having a surge and everything goes off on it, and the fact that I can't get through and use my whatever other blockchain applications that I want to use, it won't work. And splitting them out and sharding them in this way, but still maintaining that kind of, the immutability and the confidence is where you get the wins.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the goal of it, is to isolate some of the big hogs of the network effectively, and still have them operating fine. But if they have a problem in their code, then it doesn't affect everyone. That's one of the key reasons for it.
And one thing I would like to bring up, and I think this is a very buzzy word term. I mean, we've had Web 1, we've had Web 2.0, the concept of Web 3.0. What is this? I assume it's the distribution, the decentralization.
Yeah, it basically is. So concepts like IPFS, obviously blockchains, even distributed ledger technologies, which is the company-friendly version of a blockchain. Which I still think doesn't serve that much of a purpose, but I think it's the combination of those things that do it. And I think actually it's almost like an ideological movement to a certain extent of crowd ownership of services. I think the recent Facebook scandal with Cambridge Analytica is a really good example of why a decentralized social network would be an amazing thing, because you would have no advertisements, all of your data would be your own. And you would still have all of the perks of that social network. You could still use decentralized file storage to store all of your photos and videos and share it with people through a simple interface. We've already seen effectively the proof of concept in this field, which is Steemit, which really shows that you can build a blockchain that is usable by normal people who have never interacted with a blockchain before. And I have friends that have used Steemit and I've showed them it, and I didn't tell them that it was a blockchain. They didn't know until I told them.
See, now that is the win, isn't it? That is the absolute win.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the end goal. One of my favorite projects that's really, really, low value, I don't think I actually own any of their tokens anymore, was a project called Swarm City. And they're really, really focused on, open source movement and they use IPFS and all these kind of things and decentralization. But one thing that they are absolutely, laser beam focused on is keeping the interaction with the platform as simple as possible. And you can actually go on their website, and it's effectively like a demo of what they've built so far in terms of UI. And it's basically just the most clean, simple UI you could ever imagine for anything. There is a photo of like a blank face, and you click it, and then you can set your display profile as that. And there's no indication anywhere on this that you're using a blockchain, but you're using a blockchain for absolutely everything. Everything on that website is stored through IPFS, for example. So it's really, really cool to see these kind of projects coming along. And personally, I really can't wait for these things to come to fruition. I was at an EOS meetup in London a few weeks ago, and there was a guy there who was presenting. And it was a very interesting audience. There was a guy with the Financial Times wrapped under one of his arms, perched up on a stool in
I would ask, like, what is the demographic of people at these meetups now?
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing. It's so wide. You have people like the guy I was just describing, right? Who is clearly a rich guy. Maybe he's like C-level in a company, board of directors or whatever. Perhaps he's a trader. Perhaps he works for a bank or something. But he's got a lot of money. And he asked some of the most idiotic questions in that room, as far as people like me and most of the other people in the room were concerned. He really had a lot of concerns about, but how do you pay for it? How does this work? And how does this work? And didn't understand the basics of EOS, which this application was being built on top of. And obviously to be at an EOS meetup and have no idea about EOS, especially a developer meetup for EOS, was quite.
You're in the wrong room, mate, aren't you?
and yet there was this guy on the floor who was like wearing a vest and shorts. And bear in mind, like, this was a couple of months ago, so this was like February or something. So it was really cold, and he was just like wearing a vest and shorts. Like the shorts were all ripped and like super scruffy, like hair down to his waist. And I think he was probably the richest person in the room. I have a feeling. And he was asking all of the right questions about these applications and how to get involved in them. And he really understood the space. And you can tell very quickly, I think, at meetups these days who's been in the space for a long time, because generally they're a lot more understated, I think. That's what I've noticed. It's very interesting. I mean, there are plenty of, there's a good mix. There's a good mix. I think the one thing actually that we're missing most of probably at the moment is women, unfortunately. Although I like that Lightning Network has Elizabeth Stark, who's kind of carrying the torch for women in blockchain at the moment, and as Laura Shin. There are some good blockchain women out there, but certainly when you actually go out to the meetups and stuff, it is a bit male.
Unfortunately, that is in all tech, sadly still.
Yeah, at the moment.
Unfortunately. But with Web3 and stuff, and this idea, and this is something I'm very interested in, is the idea of these, because obviously you've got the languages like Ethereum, or you've got like the programming languages that allow you to write things with like Solidity and stuff in Ethereum, like these smart contracts. But there's these SDKs and stuff that allow you to just do it on even higher level languages like JavaScript. And this idea that you'll be able to kind of interact with the blockchain just in your web browser and to be able to produce these applications is fascinating. And that's where you say you get these things like Steemit and Scuttlebutt and stuff that people will not know that you use in the blockchain. And I think that's the win. And this is the reason why Facebook is scary, because, and it's like Google, it's like, it's not free, that you're the product. If you're not paying for it, you are the product. And it's more it stands up test of time that you don't have ownership of of your online presence when you're using these products.
Yeah, and it's interesting because if you kind of expand out a few years and you think about the potential utopian world of everything being decentralized, there is every reality that we have a point in our lives where everyone owns a little Raspberry Pi size computer that maybe costs $50 or something, and that will effectively contribute to running their social media platforms that they use, the YouTube platforms that they use. Absolutely everything that they use in their day-to-day life, their currency, shops that they potentially own parts of and own shares of, companies, stock markets, all of these, betting websites, absolutely everything that anyone would potentially use online. And you could effectively just have a small box on your desk, or even built into your refrigerator or something like that, that is helping to run all of these networks and basically has a node for all of these different networks that you care about, and you can just pick which ones you want to run.
Yeah, and contributing to what you use. And that's exactly what you want. You want to maintain what you're currently using in an easy-to-use manner. And I think that's, obviously at the moment we're, it's this whole idea of crossing the chasm and stuff where, we are still very much in the early stages. So products that come out, we've got to incentivize people who don't really care about the underlying technologies, and social networks and stuff are a great way of doing that.
Yeah, I think I really think that I said, I don't know if we discussed it on the last podcast actually, but for probably about the last 8 or 9 months now, I've been talking about EOS as my most bullish, to use a trading term, my most bullish pick for a cryptocurrency. And
would you mind explaining a little bit about EOS actually? Because I know we mentioned Dash last time.
Yeah, so EOS is actually a competitor to Ethereum, effectively, and it's built by the same guy that built Steemit. And before Steemit, he also built BitShares, which is another. It's not quite as smart contracty as Ethereum. You can't write anything, but you can certainly create different share structures for companies and different tokens with different mechanics pretty easily on it. And it's a decentralized exchange to exchange them on, and that's been running for a pretty long time. And with both of these, he made monumental steps in the number of transactions per second that you can do through both. So Steemit supports, I think, something in the region of 10,000 transactions per second, something like that, which is basically more than pretty much any other blockchain at the moment that isn't using some weird magic. And Steemit obviously has been very successful in terms of a UI perspective. And EOS has taken that, and he's taken that proof of concept and he said, right, I want to now enable everyone to build things the same size as that application on one network. And so he started working on EOS. And there's some pretty complex stuff going on in it, and it is slightly more centralized in how it works. It uses delegated proof of stake, which basically means that you get to stake, but you delegate someone to do that for you. Effectively, you delegate a block producer who creates the blocks, and there's only a small number of them. I think it's 21, or it might have gone up to like just over 50, who are actually validating blocks. But the block times are, in theory, somewhere around 1 second. So you have a block every second, and the reason that you can do that is because of the delegated side of it. So effectively, what happens is every time someone's mining a block, they are voting on the order of who gets to pick the next 5 blocks ahead. So the network is effectively thinking ahead about who's going to produce the next one, so that there isn't any latency, and they can tell them to start working on it pretty much straight away. Yeah, and it's about basically streamlining, how it's using the world effectively. Because obviously, if one block producer is in Australia and the other is in the UK, then that's going to take potentially over a second to just get to him to start the next block, by which point it's technically too late. So it's very important to delegate based on geographic location and ping, and you have these big block producers who are effectively running some big complex hardware, so that the normal nodes and users of the platform don't need to. But those are owned by various different parties and decentralized, and there's lots of them, and you can vote for the one that you want your stake to go towards. So if there's a bad actor, you can effectively remove him. It's a bit like having, how politics works and where you elect a representative. So that's the system they've gone for, and there's no transaction fees. It's a crazy system. There's a lot to explain on it, but they are due to release the first version of it, the actual blockchain, in a few months' time, in June, I think it is. So if you've got any EOS tokens, you need to register them on their website, because they're currently ERC20 tokens, and they will swap it for you to the real token when the mainnet goes live.
Man, that is exciting. Exciting times indeed.
Yeah. So that's one that I've been talking about for a long time. And at Christmas, I did a podcast episode basically with eToro, with a bunch of their other top traders. And they asked us all to predict like, the top 3 cryptocurrencies by this time next year. And I put EOS in the top 3. I think it will surpass Ripple, and possibly even surpass Ethereum.
What's your thoughts on Ripple?
I'm not a big fan of Ripple, generally speaking, because I think it has a lot of problems with centralization. Over 60% of the tokens are still owned by the company and some of the founders, which is an awful lot of supply to have in the hands of one person. If we saw on the run up to $3.50, actually, Chris Larson, who's one of the founders of Ripple, actually become, I think it was the 40-something richest person in the world, surpassing Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, no, that's not good. That doesn't work out, does it, really? The idea of decentralization.
And for something that's not even really being used yet, you can imagine if this project works and if they do manage to onboard lots and lots of banks and, everyone starts using it, it becomes effectively like a global reserve currency, which is basically their plan. Their plan is to build it as a reserve currency that's used as a settlement layer. If that works, then he would actually probably be richer than most nations. And so that's actually my single biggest problem with it, is that I am categorically against anyone being that rich. And I find it slightly concerning and almost repulsive, actually, that they've still got that money and they haven't decided to give it away or do something good with it. It just seems so weird that after becoming a billionaire that you would just keep going and keep going and keep going, knowing that your project is not even at 1% of its potential. It's just insane, that someone can be that greedy. So that's like one of my personal big gripes about it. But there are a lot of other problems to do with centralization. So, for example, Stellar, which forked off of Ripple originally and then decided to create its own consensus mechanism, created its own consensus mechanism because they found flaws in Ripple's, and they were very concerned that it basically wouldn't work after a certain point. So that's why Stellar created their own version. So, there's a lot of to and fro between Ripple and Stellar about, if that's a real fault or not. There's problems concerning, how nodes operate. So anyone can now create a node to become a validator on Ripple's network. But in order to do that, you have to first be approved by Ripple and put onto like a default list. And of course, everyone uses
centralization.
So they're in charge of, you can become a node, but no one's going to use you unless Ripple say, oh yeah, you can use this guy. So there's a lot of things. They have produced a plan on how they want to decentralize over time, and they have genuinely made steps in the right direction. A year ago there were less than 50 active nodes on Ripple, and now there are somewhere in the region of 300 or so. So it's taking steps in the right direction, but I think there's still a huge amount of things to be concerned about, and I don't think really it's the kind of thing that fits into that vision that I gave you a few minutes ago of everyone contributes to what, no one is fully in charge of a piece of infrastructure. Whereas Ripple is quite clearly, I think, an attempt to make sure that they still control that piece of infrastructure they're building.
I think that is the fear, isn't it? I think Vitalik's mentioned it before, is that the biggest, scariest thing is if the governments and maybe Google and things and Facebook create their own cryptocurrency that everyone uses, because you still are centralized. Like you may get some of it. I mean, the idea would be, some of the bits, that are pros of this kind of movement you could get, but then fundamentally they hold the keys. And there's this idea that, there's still a root key that we can still turn it on and off how we please.
Yeah. It's about freedom of choice at the end of the day, I think. But I do think we're going to see this play out over the next few years. I think we're going to see this battle between Amazon coin and Bitcoin probably within the next two or 3 years, and I suspect even on the earlier side of that time frame, we've already seen governments themselves start to create cryptocurrencies.
Only a matter of time, and it's scary. I know we've hit over the hour mark now, so I'd just like to ask one more question and one more topic that I'm really interested in at the moment, and that is IPFS. So you did actually ping me with this after the last episode, and I looked into it, and it's just a fascinating project. Would you mind maybe explaining a little bit for the audience?
Yeah, so IPFS is basically decentralized storage, and it's a network of storage effectively, and anyone can give out their hard drive space on this network. And there are quite a few different implementations of it. And there are even some other solutions, like I mentioned, like Siacoin, which are kind of on their own and aren't technically the same thing. But basically, it allows for totally decentralized storage, and you can link this into your websites, and there's lots of things in there for redundancy and things like that. And you can choose how high performance you want it. But effectively, the ideas that I've seen floated around most often are by applications a bit like Swarm City, actually, who are using IPFS in a small collection of other projects, and they've all basically promised to store all of each other's data, so that there is some really strong redundancy, and that it remains decentralized, and they're all purposely paying to store other people's data to ensure that it's fully decentralized. And of course, as we know, decentralization comes with a whole bunch of advantages, such as immutability, the inability for government to shut it down, and things like that. So yeah, it's an interesting movement, and I think actually it's one of the biggest movements specifically for websites and for the web. Like, it really enables a much more distributed like website infrastructure. Effectively, the ability for you to create a website about, let's say, I don't know, UKIP, right? I'm not a big fan of UKIP, but potentially, if a country is super left leaning and they don't want that to exist, it would be at this point reasonably easy to enforce. We've seen GCHQ do these sort of things.
That's it.
Start blocking.
There's too much centralization in the web at this time.
Yeah, definitely.
And like the big players and stuff like AWS and CDNs like Cloudflare and stuff. You have all this infrastructure that can be easily manipulated.
Yeah, exactly. It's very easy to censor people now, because, as you say, like most people are getting their web hosting and their web services from 3 companies, right? And those companies are Amazon, Alibaba, and Microsoft, possibly in that order. Might not be in that order, actually. I think Microsoft's second, but Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services, and Alibaba's that I don't know the name of are basically providing everything. And so if you're building something that is inherently competing against these guys, it would be very easy for them to censor you. And of course, Alibaba, we know, is working very, very closely with the Chinese government on all sorts of different projects, most notably the Black Mirror-esque rating system for every citizen. And when a company is working that closely to the government, you really do have to wonder, like, do they have access to your data and your projects? If you're working on something that's highly confidential, perhaps you're working on a new cryptocurrency, there's every chance that, and you're storing your files on there or whatever, your website's running off it, there's every chance that China could just come along and turn it off, and take your work. So I think that's that's at the core of the movement. It's about protecting people's rights and trying to remove the power from the big companies that are currently taking over the space.
No, absolutely. I mean, and the nice thing about IPFS and stuff is that, again, that it's kind of dealing with it in the consumer side of things, is you have HTTP kind of bindings to it. So you're able to use, these things. And the idea of content versus location-based addressing is super interesting. This concept, where we have a website at this time, I have a cat picture on there, cat.jpg. I send you that link. You don't know if that's the actual, someone may have maliciously changed that. You don't know if that's the actual thing, whereas with content-based addressing, where I have a verifiable, reproducible SHA, hash, or whatever of that file, that when I'm sending you this link, that I'm expecting you to see the same contents as what I envisioned you to do. So yeah, it's super, super interesting and powerful.
That's actually another thing that I kind of forgot to mention, is that there is, I don't know if they've already started doing it yet, but there's a lot of potential to store things effectively only once. You don't need to make 1 million copies of something and store it everywhere. If everyone is using the same Twitter logo on their website, then there could just be
deduplication.
Exactly. There can just be like 50 versions of the same Twitter logo, but they're all the same hash, right? So that you're getting the correct version, the verified version that everyone else is using. And that it is, as you say, exactly that thing. And you're not wasting space with 25 different versions, one that's 25 megabytes in size and one that's 10 kilobytes in size and one that's, a vector image and one that's something else. You just have the default for all the different, all the different sizes and formats. And you don't have duplicates of them. You're not wasting space.
It's the Git version control way of doing it. And I think
Yeah.
actually it's interesting that I think Dropbox actually fundamentally does this, which is a little more scary because obviously then they're obviously reading your files easily and being able to dedupe them. This idea that if you're sharing it between multiple Dropbox accounts, this file, what's the point in having multiple of them? So I think, it has been used in the past to success.
It's an interesting space.
It is totally interesting. I could talk to you for hours and hours, man, but I know you're a very busy man. So I think what we'll do is leave it there. But I say it's been a great time again, man, and definitely have to have you back on if you're up for it because, it's just always super interesting talking to you about all this stuff.
Yeah, of course. Perhaps
Awesome.
next time we can talk about EOS more.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Oh, definitely, man. Definitely. All right, then, audience. Well, it's been another great episode, and we'll speak to you again next week. Goodbye.
You've been listening to 3 Devs and a Maybe. You can contact us at contact@3devsandamaybe.com or follow us on Twitter at 3 Devs and a Maybe.